before. Cabrini Green was labeled public housing's most notorious failure. It was Little Hell, Chicago's first slum. It birthed Chicago's Irish and Italian mafia, and was home to every vice imaginable. The slums were knocked down in 1942 and replaced by the 586-unit Cabrini row houses for the local black folk. When the war ended, so did their jobs. Mass unemployment followed. Drug dealer became the #1 occupation of Cabrini's adult males, and the decadence and criminality surged. Demand for housing in the area resulted in the construction of several high-rise projects. Between 1957 and 1962, Cabrini Green. Decades later, it was an urban nightmare. The worst of its kind. Here's how the story played out. Before Cabrini Green became a symbol of urban decay, this part of Chicago was already struggling with poverty. The neighborhood once known as Little Hell was demolished, and public housing rose in its place. But the buildings alone could not solve the deeper problems. As jobs disappeared and poverty grew, Cabrini Green slowly became a neighborhood where opportunity was becoming harder and harder to find. On April 5, 1968, one day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, the west side of Chicago erupted in chaos. Though the day started with peaceful marches, by nighttime, neighborhoods were being destroyed and burned to the ground. There were shootouts with police and mass looting, too. Over at Cabrini at around 3 a.m., snipers were positioned in the high-rise buildings and directed their shots at firefighters, prompting a police response. Police officers and National Guardsmen stormed the building the shots were coming from and made their way to the 12th floor. They never found the shooters, but they did find a dead body on the balcony. Curtis Jeffro, Trentayone. Of that address, he was dead from a headshot. In the aftermath, local businesses packed up and left, and the neighborhood became even poorer. Even worse, the threat of sniper fire gave cops a new fear of Cabrini Green. The residents would now be on their own for the next few decades. In 1970, 38-year-old Sergeant James Severin was a 13-year veteran of the Chicago PD and had previously worked the security detail protecting Martin Luther King Jr. In 1966, 6 weeks before his death, Sergeant Severin stood near Cabrini Green and told a reporter about his hopes for a walk-and-talk patrol, an attempt to pacify relationships between local cops and Cabrini Green residents. Behind Cabrini Green's reputation were also people trying to bridge the gap between the community and the police. Sergeant James Severin was one of them. Local children knew him as Uncle Jim, a man who played with them and tried to earn their trust. But in a city already divided by anger and distrust, building that relationship was becoming increasingly difficult. Chicago cops called it Combat Alley because gunshots would go off inside and from the building. Almost daily, residents were known to throw Molotovs, bricks and bottles from the building too. Given the danger and the hate they received, emergency calls from the projects routinely went unanswered by police, but not from Sergeant Severin and Risotto. As the court-accepted version of events played out on July 17, 1970, multiple witnesses and a security guard testified seeing George Knight and Johnny Ville in the vicinity of and inside the building that shots would later be fired from. Ville allegedly asked a security guard if some of the apartments on the 6th floor were vacant. He also allegedly asked some youths around for .30 ammunition. Witnesses later saw Ville and Nice with a .30 Winchester and a .30 Savage rifles. They heard them audibly planning to ice the police too. Knights and Ville then made their way to a 6th floor apartment, with their rifles where they stood on a bathtub, to get a better view of the baseball diamond below. A witness saw the barrel of a gun sticking out of a window, and loud shots followed. Witnesses would give accounts of their braggadocious attitude and statements after the shooting. It was an hour before the end of Sergeant Severin's shift. When he went to check out the gunfire from the towers, Sergeant Risotto joined him. There was an ongoing cross-building shootout between the Black Disciples and the Doozes, and both cops walked across the concrete baseball diamond as they approached one of the buildings. They say the blast sounded like a shotgun. Sergeant Severin clutched at his chest, where there was a baseball-sized hole. He then dropped lifeless. Sergeant Risotto, 10 feet behind him, turned to help or maybe tried to run for cover. But he didn't get far. The second shot struck him and spun him around. He took a few more steps and then fell. Both officers had been killed with a single shot before they could get their guns out. When backup arrived to recover the fallen officers' bodies, they had to crouch behind cars while rifle fire bounced off the concrete around them. And the ensuing standoff. Cops fired hundreds of rounds into the building. When the police got inside the building, now 200 strong, they kicked down doors and searched each apartment 3 or 4 times. Over 100 people were arrested, and the 2 rifles used in the murders were found in an incinerator in the building. George Knights was caught in the sweep. Johnny Ville turned himself in several days later after seeing his wanted status. On TV, the people captured were surprisingly cooperative. But the investigations were later marred with accusations of police brutality. At the station, the police allegedly demanded a story from each person, under threat of violence or prison. At least 1 person confessed and implicated 3 others. 2 of the accused were Ville and Knights Villan. Knight will later be sentenced to indefinite terms of 100 to 199 years at the Illinois State Penitentiary. But the trial was marred by a ton of inconsistencies. During the trial, Ville reported that Chicago police officers threatened members of his family, warning them not to show up for court proceedings. They told Ville that if he was acquitted, they'd kill him. Ville's attorney's office was broken into during the trial, and files on the case were stolen. His attorney also told Ville he feared police retaliation. No one testified that they actually saw either Ville or Knight shooting at the police or anyone else. Evidence from the coroner withheld from the jury showed the shots were, in fact, fired from street level, but the autopsy reports he made were never introduced as evidence. Witness testimonies weren't the most credible, as many were members of rival gangs. There were no fingerprints on the rifles found in the building that day. What was clear was that someone had gunned the 2 officers down from a distance, and Chicago PD had to see someone take the fall for it. Whether they arrested the right people to begin with still remains a mystery to this day. Johnny Ville, who was 17 at the time, was paroled in 2021. George Knights remains in prison. 72 manufacturing companies laid off several thousand African Americans. At Cabrini, poverty and desperation went up and single moms moved in. Undocumented people to help with the rent. Before long, many people couldn't afford to pay rent. And the city gave up on renovations entirely. People slept in the hallways. Stairwells used drugs, openly pissed in the open and spray-painted the walls with graffiti. The kids played amongst trash and drug needles. Sniper shootings continued unabated, and multiple innocents would be felled every single month. During raids, cops would find weapons stashed in hallway fireboxes, many equipped with telescopic sights. On top of that, Cabrini elevators were by far the most dangerous form of transport in the city. Cabrini youths had learned how to control the elevators to set up mugging, rapes, and extortion. The gang problem got even worse throughout the 70s, when the Egyptian Cobras, Black Disciples, and Vice Lords absorbed all the smaller gangs. Over the years, they grew Cabrini into a 9-figure-a-year drug empire. A gangster's paradise, where armed dealers worked in gang-mandated shifts from the outside. The towers became even more intimidating after several people were either thrown off or fell off the breezeways. Chain-link fences were installed, and they made the towers look like animal cages. Cabrini became shrouded in urban legends of the horrors that happened there. Only junkies would ever dare come close. In 1981, Mayor Jane Byrne moved into a 16th-floor apartment at Cabrini. For 3 weeks, she did it to prove to the city that if you had constant police presence in the area, the crime and gangs would go away. Cabrini residents have mixed emotions about having the mayor. As a neighbor, she could get sniped too. She not no different, she just a different color. Devon stopped only while she was there. When she left, the gangs learned a well door shut to fortified apartments, just like the mayor had by the 90s. 70% of Cabrini Green residents were 16 or younger. One of the project's 134-unit towers had just 5 adult male residents. Law enforcement stayed as far from the projects as possible, as they blocked the streets at night near the buildings. The gang members now had the gall to walk outside with automatic weapons and even fire them in the air. 942 Chicagoans were murdered in 1992, making it the most deadly year in the city since 1957. Anthony Quabbing Garrett was an expert marksman who served 3 years in the military in the early 1970s. The 6-foot tattooed 33-year-old umpire Cuban Youth League baseball games. He was also a security chief for the Stones. Garrett's criminal record span 18 years. He was convicted 6 times between 1976 and 1987 on weapons charges. In 1981, he was acquitted of killing a rival gang member in a Cabrini stairwell. And in 92, he was free on bond for a 1991 weapons charge. In the days prior, gunfire had flared between the vice lords, who controlled one building and Stones at another. According to court documents, on October 13, 1992, witnesses claimed that Garrett had expressed that he was upset with the vice lords and voiced his intention to retaliate. He went to a 10th floor apartment where the Cobras stashed an AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. Gerard then went to an open window in the bathroom that offered a direct view of the enemy's building. From there, he saw 6 vice lords from a standing offhand position. He aimed and fired 2 to 3 shots at them. He then left the apartment and handed the rifle to a youngster on the way out. Jenna Elementary at Cabrini Green had already lost 2 young students to gunfire in 1992. In fact, shots went off so often, the local kids had learned to drop to the ground at the sound of gunfire a little before 9 a.m. on Tuesday. For children in Cabrini Green, violence was no longer something happening somewhere else. It had become part of their daily reality. In 1992, 7-year-old Dontrell Davis was killed while walking to school with his mother. His death became more than another homicide. It showed Chicago how deeply the violence had entered everyday life, and how even a child could become its victim. Detectives soon found a witness who had seen shots fired from the window of a 10th floor apartment, about 300 yards from where Dontrell was gunned down. The building was more than half vacant, but used frequently by gang members, who posted sentries on the upper floors. In apartment 1001, police found 3 .233 caliber shell casings, apparently from a high-powered rifle. A witness would confess to seeing Quabbing carrying a rifle up the stairs of the building earlier that morning, and the police knew exactly who Quabbing was. Garrett was arrested 5 hours after the shooting and held in an interrogation room for 24 hours of intermittent questioning. Garrett signed a 5.5-page confession the next day or so. The cops would claim, Garrett would later claim, he was beaten with a rubber hose and forced to sign. In court, prosecutors portrayed Garrett as an incorrigible individual. And in 1994, Garrett was convicted of murdering Dontrell and sentenced to 100 years in prison. The gun used to kill Dontrell was never found. Dontrell's murder made everyone feel embarrassed. It symbolized everything that was wrong with Chicago that year. In the aftermath, it kicked off a renewed war on drugs and gangs, and one city official suggested calling in the National Guard, a step that wasn't taken. Mayor Richard Daley instead ordered a police sweep of Cabrini buildings. For weapons and drugs, underused buildings were sealed. Metal detectors and stringent security systems were installed in the high-rises, and leaders of 12th Street gangs declared a truce. That truce lasted for at least 3 to 4 years. Crime dropped citywide the next year, and there were no homicides at Cabrini for 8 months after Dontrell's slaying. Regardless, the murder made local and national politicians shift their efforts from reform of Cabrini to its destruction. Not just Cabrini, but the other projects in Chicago and across America. Between September 27, 1995 and May 3, 2011, Cabrini Green was erased from the planet. What was once Little Hell in Cabrini Green now looks unrecognizable. Today, the area is filled with high-priced condos and townhomes. And that's the story of the worst ghetto America has ever seen. 23 towers of the most prototypical inner-city black poverty. They say the game is as old as the Bible. And it's a well-known fact that prostitution is the oldest profession of all time in the U.S. Prostitution is only legal in Nevada and has remained a mysterious black market in the rest of the country. For decades, the game worked on a cash-only basis, and there were no contracts or signed documents. And despite being a 9-figure-a-year industry in some cities, prostitution remains one of the most pervasive street crimes, of which there is very little knowledge or persecution. Pimping, on the other hand, is more of a culture bred in the inner-city black neighborhoods and had its heyday in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The word pimp has come to be associated with a snazzy, dressed black man slick with their words. and quick to inflict violence on disobedient employees. The word has no clear origins, but pimps like to come up with their own. Clever acronyms for properly inspiring and managing, prostitutes being one of them. Pimps are often very sophisticated, intelligent, and good judges of human nature. The glamorous image of old-school pimp culture hid a much darker system. Behind the money and flashy clothes was control, through manipulation, financial dependence, drugs, and sometimes violence. Many victims were already vulnerable before they entered the street economy. Over the years, the system changed with technology moving from street corners and motels toward phones, websites, and eventually social media. For predators or serial killers. Old-school pimps used to advertise via phone books, newspapers, business cards. On the streets, they network with other pimps to keep tabs on law enforcement, recruitment opportunities, and business destinations. They also work with hotel employees to get tips on cops and discounts, sometimes even paying them off or offering free services. The AIDS epidemic slowed down the pimp economy significantly around '85, and because of the exploitive nature of the game and the fact that some pimps would actively try to recruit minors, and criminal charge that was once pimping and pandering was changed to human trafficking, a name with a much scarier connotation today. Pimping isn't what it used to be, and that's largely moved to the digital realm. There's less need or incentive to work under a pimp. So girls only opt for pimps that can guarantee high earnings without any of the violence. Hell with the simp epidemic. Girls can even make a killing without doing any sex acts entirely. The pimp game is characterized by things like coded language on pricing and risque images on dedicated websites. Girls are advertised on online classifieds, social media vehicles, discussion boards, chat rooms, dating websites, and custom web pages. With pimping, the money comes to them and they even get higher paying clientele. The internet also negated physical dangers of street prostitution, but pimping has also made it easier for law enforcement to track pimp activities via digital footprints, e.g. texts, videos, and images, so pimps and girls often talk in coded language, face-to-face or over walkie-talkies. Girls are trained to sniff out undercover via their dress or mannerisms. These days, pimps feel that cops are harder on them. Regardless, the game is propped up by the same people who despise it. Without rich, powerful clientele and the police, the pimp game wouldn't exist. As for their depiction on TV, real pimps think movies exaggerate how pimps treat girls, and they're irritated at how the world is diluted these days, and everyone in rap is a pimp. In hindsight, many pimps have no remorse. At the end of their lives, they believe that girls in the business need a pimp for instruction and guidance, and that they elevated the girls that worked under them. Zero remorse for a life lived on their own terms, and upholding a culture predicated on glamorizing human slavery. In the autumn of 1974, as the New York bank opened its doors for another ordinary day, Chad "Slim" Williams and his crew were preparing to execute one of their daring robberies. Slim, calm and composed, had orchestrated every move, every second of this heist. By the time the day ended, another page will be added to the legend of the most prolific black bank robber in American history, a man whose life defied the rules and challenged the system. Chaz Lynn Williams was born in Harlem during the mid-20th century, a time of cultural brilliance but economic despair. Before he could remember the music of the Harlem Renaissance or its bustling streets, his family moved to Jamaica, Queens. It was there, in a neighborhood shaped by inequality, that Slim's path to infamy began. From the age of 8, Slim started skipping school, stealing and running, with older kids who saw potential in his sharp instincts. At just 12, he was in his first armed robbery, a drugstore heist that landed him in the Bronx Youth House, the detention center intended for reform. Instead, became his first criminal education. For Slim, the streets weren't just an escape. They were survival in an America full of economic inequality. Upward mobility seemed unattainable for many young black boys. By his teenage years, Slim had embraced the street life fully, moving between New York and Florida, honing the skills that would later make him infamous. At just 15, Slim carried out his first bank robbery. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the thrill, the control, and the planning. Slim saw a bank robbery as a craft, and he elevated it into an art form. His crew specialized in takeover robberies. This wasn't a quiet demand note slid to a teller. This was a lightning-fast operation. A floor man dominated the lobby, neutralizing threats, while others emptied cash drawers or escorted the manager to the vault. Every robbery followed the 60-second rule, in and out before the police could respond. Slim's precision wasn't just bold, it was brilliant. His crew used police scanners, pre-arranged safe houses, and stolen cars to disappear before authorities even arrived. Over time, Slim's operation crossed state lines, making him a ghost that law enforcement struggled to catch. For years, Slim's crew remained untouchable. But in the end, it wasn't his mistakes that led to his capture. It was betrayal. An informant desperate to save themselves gave Slim up. Arrested on charges of conspiracy, he was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. But prison wasn't a dead end for Slim. It was just another opportunity to strategize. While serving time, Slim joined a federal work release program, attending classes at the University of Michigan. While he studied by day, by night, Slim masterminded another wave of robberies. His alibi as a model inmate gave him cover to orchestrate new heists. Authorities eventually caught on. A raid on one of Slim's safe houses ended in a shootout, and this time prosecutors piled on the charges. Slim received a staggering 95-year sentence, a crushing end to his reign as one of the most resourceful criminals in American history. In prison, Slim began a journey of transformation, earning 2 bachelor's degrees. He became a vocal advocate for education and correctional facilities. He believed that knowledge could break the cycle of crime for others. Just like him after serving 15 years. Slim was granted parole. He spoke of redemption, saying, "Education opened my eyes to what I could be. I'm not the man I was upon release." Slim turned his street smarts and connections into legitimate ventures, using the lessons of his past. Slim founded Black Hand Entertainment, a record label that became a cornerstone of New York's hip-hop scene. His street credibility and strategic mind made him an invaluable mentor to rising stars like Foxy Brown and 50 Cent. But Slim's past occasionally cast shadows on his new life. In Many Men, 50 Cent alluded to a falling out, a reminder that Slim's duality wasn't always easy to reconcile. Despite the controversy, Slim's work in the industry cemented his reputation as a bridge between the streets and success. In 2022, Chad Slim Williams passed away, closing the chapter on a life that defied convention. For the hip-hop community, Slim wasn't just a figure of the past, he was a reminder of the fine line between survival and success. Chaz Lynn Williams lived a life of contradictions. A mastermind criminal who became a mentor, a figure of infamy who found redemption. His story forces us to ask, can a person truly escape their past? In the heart of Chicago, amidst the hustle and bustle of city life, a powerful force was emerging. In the mid-1970s, the El Ruckus, a name that would soon become synonymous with both fear and reverence. As the city grappled with economic challenges and social unrest, the Ruckus carved out a niche for themselves. They weren't just another street gang. They were a community force, organizing neighborhood events to mediating street disputes. They often blurred the lines between protectors and perpetrators. At the helm of this group was Jeff Fort, a charismatic leader with a vision. Known to many as Chief Malik, he was a man of contrast. On one hand, he was seen as a beacon of hope, a leader who advocated for the rights of the marginalized. On the other, he was a shrewd strategist, always a step ahead of his adversaries. Under Fort's leadership, the group grew in numbers and strength. Their operations expanded, and so did their ambitions. As the Arabics solidified their position in Chicago's urban landscape, they also caught the attention of law enforcement. But for the residents of the neighborhood, they dominated. They were more than just a gang. They were a symbol of resilience, unity, defiance against a system that is often seen stacked against them. The mid-1970s marked the turning point for Jeff Fort. Incarceration for many is a time of reflection. And for Fort, it was no different. During his time in prison, Fort was introduced to the teachings of Islam. It provided a structured sense of purpose. a new direction for his life and a new vision for his gang. Upon his release, 40 emerged with a new purpose. He rebranded the gang, giving it a name that reflected its new ethos. Rockers, an Arabic term meaning foundation, which was symbolic of the new path he envisioned for the group, one that was rooted in faith and community service. The Iraqians, under forced guidance, began to incorporate Islamic practices into their daily lives. Prayer sessions became a common sight, and the gang's headquarters echo with the sound of Quranic verses. However, the shift did not go unnoticed. Law enforcement, already weary of the group's influence, now viewed them with increased suspicion. This new identity, while bringing them close as a community, also set the stage for the challenges that lay ahead. Rukn's ambitions eventually took the organization far beyond Chicago. Federal investigators began monitoring Jeff Fort and uncovering alleged international connections. The FBI launched an undercover operation involving weapons, while investigators followed leads stretching from Chicago to Panama and Libya. What had once been seen as a Chicago street gang was now at the center of a much larger federal investigation. 1987, the year that will see culmination of the U.S. government's pursuit of the Iraqis. The stage was set for one of the most sensational trials in American history, with the nation's eyes fixed on Chicago's courtroom. From the outset, it was clear that this was no ordinary trial. The atmosphere was thick with tension and anticipation. And as attendees made their way into the courtroom, they were met with metal detectors and state police dogs patrolling the corridors. Amidst his height and security, it was the Iraqis themselves who commanded the most attention. The distinctive attire set them apart. A bold statement of their identity in defiance. Red fezzes adorned their heads, while their bodies were draped in white flowing robes. Fur coats and cornrows, the trial was a media frenzy. Reporters jostled for the best positions, their cameras capturing every moment. The prosecutor's opening statement set the tone. This case concerns organized crime with a twist of terrorism. As the proceedings began, the weight of the evidence against the Ruckus became clear. The wiretaps, the sting operation, the meetings in Panama, it all painted a picture of a gang that had overreached, blinded by ambition and greed. But as the evidence was presented, they remained defiant. Central to the prosecution's argument was the Ruckus connection to Libya. Through a series of recordings, documents, and testimonies, they painted a picture of a gang that had not only sought financial gain, but had also been willing to commit acts of terror on American soil. For a foreign power, the wiretap conversations from Fort's prison phone played a pivotal role. The jury listened intently as Fort's voice echoed through the courtroom, discussing plans, deals, and the promise of wealth from Gaddafi. The recordings provided a rare insight into the inner workings of the gang and their international ambitions. Witnesses were called, each adding another layer to the prosecution's case. Undercover agents recounted their interactions with the Rukns, detailing the gang's eagerness to procure weapons and their discussions about potential targets. The testimony from the sting operation was particularly damning, with agents describing how the group had been willing to purchase any weapon for a terrorist act. But perhaps the most compelling evidence was the account of the meetings in Panama. The prosecution presented a timeline corroborated by hotel records, flight details, and witness testimonies that placed them in direct contact with Libyan representatives. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the evidence seemed insurmountable. The Ruckus, once feared and revered on the streets of Chicago, were now on the defensive, battling not just for their freedom, but for their very legacy. The courtroom was packed to capacity. As the trial neared its conclusion, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty. The courtroom erupted a mix of relief, shock, and disbelief. The formidable gang that had once held Chicago in its grips had been brought to justice. The aftermath of the trial was swift and decisive. Key members, including Jeff Fort, faced lengthy prison sentences. Their assets were seized, the operation disrupted, and their influence on the streets of Chicago began to wane. In the wake of the verdict, questions began to emerge about the conduct of the prosecution. Allegations of prosecutorial misconduct surface, casting a shadow over what had been held as a significant victory. Against organized crime, rumors of bribes, coercion, and the suppression of evidence began to circulate, tainting the integrity of the trial. As investigations into these allegations deepened, startling revelations came to light. It was discovered that some witnesses key to the prosecution's case had been provided with drugs and other favors while in custody. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Several Rukn drug cases previously seen as open and shut were re-examined in some instances. Convictions were overturned, leading to the release of members who had been incarcerated based on questionable evidence. In the aftermath of the trial, and the subsequent revelation of the Ruckus began to fade into the annals of history, their presence marked by graffiti. Gatherings and the distinct red fesses became a rare sight. Other gangs, sensing the power vacuum, moved in, staking their claims and reshaping the dynamics of Chicago's gangland. For the residents of Chicago, the diminishing presence of the Rukn was met with mixed emotions. While many breathe a sigh of relief, free from the grip of the gang's influence, others remember the sense of community and protection they once provided for all their flaws. They had been a known entity, a predictable force. The decline brought with it a new era of uncertainty. Today, the Rukns exist mostly in memories and stories, a testament to the transient nature of the power and influence. While their legacy is undeniable, their once mighty empire is a reminder that even the most formidable can fade, given time and circumstance. As the years pass and the world continues to evolve, the story of the Ruckus serves as a cautionary tale. It reminds us of the ever-present challenges of urban life, the complexities of global politics, and the thin line that separates ambition from overreach. In the chapters of American history, the Ruckers will forever be remembered not just for their crimes, but for the profound impact they had on the nation's psyche.